Well, welcome to the latest episode of On the Couch with myself, Henry Jennings from MarcusToday. And joining me today is actually an old friend of the On the Couch podcast, because we did one back in May 2022. And things have changed a little bit since then in terms of the background to this particular metal and this particular company. So I'm delighted to welcome Greg Hall from Alligator Energy to the couch today, AGE being the stock code. So welcome, Greg.
Thank you very much, Henry. Nice to be here with you.
It's great to have you back on. It's been a bit of a change in the environment, I guess. Greg, of course, is a mining engineer. He has been in the uranium business for a long time. It says here 35 years plus, but you don't look a day. Well, you certainly don't look old enough to have been in it 35 years. But management roles at WMC, Olympic Dam. Is there anybody that hasn't worked for Western Mining?
No, I'm not sure. In our industry, there's a lot of players who've been through that company.
There yes. has. It was a fantastic training ground and grounding for many of today's CEOs, I guess. Also, Greg, you were the founding CEO of Enviro Energy, and that achieved approval of WA's first modern uranium mine project. So a long and illustrious career in uranium. So you seem to be the man that we need to talk to about uranium, which has been a bit of a hot topic recently.
No, most certainly. The industry has been moving quite substantially since really about late 20, and on the back of some significant both political and other changes, technical and climate changes.
So just before we kick off, I must remind our listeners that this is general advice only, so please do your own research, contact your own financial advisor regarding any of the thoughts, ideas or insights in this podcast. All right, Greg, first question. Why is uranium enjoying such a renaissance at the moment? Let's talk big picture to kick us off. Let's set the scene, if you like.
Yeah. Look, in simple terms, it's related to energy, the energy demand around the world, the fact that the world is moving towards cleaner sources of energy, cleaner meaning less greenhouse gas emission, in particular carbon. And so the related energy sources to do with renewables are having a boost, of course, and we've seen that for many years. You're seeing that gas preferred over coal because it's half the carbon generation. Nuclear has suffered off and on over the decades from having incidents which has concerned the public around the world, and rightly so, with especially some of the older plants. But it is now, in the last 15 years in particular, the world is starting to see the modern technical innovations come through in nuclear. And so nuclear is now being seen as a very low carbon or sustainable carbon source that can back up renewables. So simply put, 22 countries around the world are thinking we need to double or triple our level of nuclear power to help support our intermittent renewables. We want sustainability, we want renewable power, but we need something to help support it, and nuclear is the one they're starting to look at.
Because this is a very kind of slow burn story, isn't it? I mean, the average age of a US nuclear power plant is 42 years, so we're not talking, overnight, and certainly the new generation, I know there's been lots of talk about SMRs, small modular reactors. A lot of that technology is yet to be proved up, and this is going to take a long time, isn't it?
Yes and no. You're right about SMRs. The modern generation of them are just now having MOUs or terms of reference and negotiated around them for places in Europe and the States and North America, China, etc. But the large-scale reactors have also had a lot of innovation. So you're now talking about generation 3 plus generation 4 reactors, which are the ones that have been built and designed from the late 80s and 90s onwards, as distinct from the older ones that were built in the early 80s, the 70s and the 60s, which are the ones that obviously we've seen around the traps for a long time. So there is now more and more large-scale reactors being built. There's in fact 60 being built around the world as we speak. And of course that's in China, in India, a few countries in Eastern Europe and in the rest of Europe. One in the US in the last 30, 40 years, that's correct. And really only one in the UK in the last 30 years or so. So, in other words, the traditional Western countries that built a lot of reactors in the 70s and 80s, being France, the UK, United States, and other countries, they haven't built for a long time. But they are now putting in place the parameters they need to go on and build. Sweden is the latest that has reversed its policy of no new construction only a month or two ago. So Western countries are gearing up to be able to build large-scale new reactors the larger ones, as well as then evaluating SMRs. So it is taking time, and that's because in particular in democracies, and in particular in Western countries, we do take the time to evaluate the ins and outs of new legislation, changing legislation, and whether and where to build nuclear power plants. That takes a long time to evaluate and do it in an appropriate manner. Countries such as India and China have had paths for some 20 years now, and they're on those paths. China is bringing four to five reactors onto the grid every year. Every year. So there is a spread of growth. In particular, you would have heard about the UAE and the fact that they put 4 nuclear power plants in place inside about 15 years. And they're now working on the next 4. Saudi Arabia is about to work on some, and so are the other neighbours. So there is differing rates of growth in nuclear power around the world. But we will see it advance in other countries as well.
Now, obviously, we don't want to get into too much of the politics surrounding Australian nuclear because it's in the news, but I think it's worth touching on it at the moment because there is this debate, I guess, happening at the moment as to whether we should be looking at building some sort of nuclear plant capability, bearing in mind, of course, that we're blessed with nuclear fuels. We've got uranium here, so it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Is that the way we should be going?
Look, to a large extent, you're right. I'll give an example. When the Ranger uranium mine, where I was a manager for a period of time in the late 90s, when that was running full tilt and producing 9 million pound of uranium a year, it was basically the amount of uranium was exporting overseas to nuclear utilities, and they were using it in nuclear reactors. Essentially, the amount of carbon they were offsetting was the equivalent of Australia's carbon generation for energy.
Wow.
That one mine, when it was at 9 million pound a year. So what it shows you is the value of the uranium that we mine and export out of Australia. We mine and export it, we sell it to utilities through North America, through Europe, through Japan, through Korea, sometimes a small amount to India and China. But in general, our uranium is being used to offset the carbon footprint of other countries. While it will take us a while if we have the mandate from the people and if we have bipartisan support at a federal level and certain state levels to put in place a nuclear power regime. And my personal opinion is that once we see these first small modular reactors, which are better suited to our grid, once we see them operating in Poland, in Europe, in Canada, in the UK, in China, in a few countries, we'll be like the second or third years, maybe, okay, now we need to have a look at this. So maybe that's 2035 onwards, maybe it's 2040, somewhere around there. So I think it would be useful. But the point about this is, should we be mining uranium and allowing this to be exported overseas, bringing good income into the country, but helping other countries reduce their carbon footprint, but not allowing that opportunity for ourselves? That doesn't make sense.
No.
So while I think it will take time to bring in a regime of potential nuclear in Australia, whether and if it can happen, I do agree we should immediately drop the ban, let the market start to consider, is it a possibility for the future? It takes a long time to even consider possibilities, to consider concepts, to get into scope, to see what others are doing. This is like a 10 to 15 year time span. The sooner you lift the ban, you can start that process and let it happen over time.
Interestingly, that sort of would coincide, I guess, with Australia getting nuclear-powered submarines.
Approximately the timing is about the same, yes, that's right.
So by kind of de facto, we're going to have mini nuclear power plants anyway, but they're just going to be, I guess, movable feasts as opposed to permanent residents of the country.
No, correct.
Let's turn our attention now, Greg, to not the small modular reactors, but the price of uranium, which has had somewhat of a renaissance, haven't it? It did top out at around $107 a pound recently, back to around 89. How does a company kind of take advantage of that, I guess, to some extent? But the spot price is always kind of a thin price, isn't it? It's more long-term contract prices, which I guess interest producers.
No, that's correct. As some of your listeners may know, there are two distinct markets in uranium sales, the spot market and the long-term market. most utilities, on average, over a long period of time, most nuclear utilities will buy probably at least 80% of their requirements under long-term contracts, which they will make with many producers. They layer them. They'll start some this year, go for 5 years. Another one starts this year, goes for 7 years. Another one starts this year, goes for 3 years. So they layer them. They have multiple sources of supply, and uranium mining companies have multiple contracts of sale to utilities. So you de-risk each other's businesses by mixing and matching long-term contracts. So that long-term contract price is set on a confidential basis between those two counterparties. So it's rarely made public, but the industry commentators, and in this case TradeTech and UX Consulting primarily, but others also, get information on the sort of base price of these contracts and report that as a term price for uranium. Now, the current term price for uranium is $75 a pound with one group, $80 a pound with another. It's just moved up this week. So that's the level of term uranium price that we see. The spot price peaking up to 106, back down to 83, then back to 90, then up again. That is almost like the excess material that's sold on a short-term basis for a sale delivery within 12 months. So that's quite often traders who might be buying or selling. Some producers might buy a little bit to have some stocks. Some utilities take the opportunity. If the price has dipped a bit, they might buy in. But mostly it's financial traders or financial investors, such as the Sprott investment fund, or traders who are going to trade uranium. And anyone who buys uranium as a trader has to sell it sometime at a slightly profit, because that's their business, making a profit out of a trade. So that spot market is driven by those opportunities and volatilities. And recently we saw where there was a sale of almost £1 million of uranium made into a market in only a few days, which dropped the price from the high 90s down to 83, and now it's gradually picked up. So it's a very thin market, as you say, and it moves depending on the volume of material available. At the moment, there's not a lot available on the spot market in general terms, but it comes and goes. It does drive sentiment in the investment market into uranium equities, and that's where it is important to CEOs like myself and what we talk about it. But in realistic terms, the closer you get production, you really want to focus on what are utilities willing to do in a formula price or a fixed price for a long-term contract. And companies like ours, we're just about to start to hit that regime. Companies like Boss and Paladin, they've been in that for some time.
It is a secretive world, isn't it, really? I mean, I've been a shareholder of a company called Silex, which I'm sure you know about. They're in the uranium enrichment business. I was a shareholder back in the mid-90s when they first started going. And it's been, 30 years nearly. And they were touting their technology back then for the next generation, I guess, of enrichment. So it's taken a long, and they're still not there. So things kind of move slowly, don't they, Greg, in this market?
Yeah, because their technology back in the 90s was quite breakthrough. They were looking at using lasers to enrich uranium isotopes. And what people need to understand is the two uranium isotopes we're interested in mainly are uranium-238, which has got 238 protons, neutrons in the nucleus, and uranium-235, which has 3 less neutrons. Now the difference in atomic mass and physical mass of these two is tiny. So the separation of them, where you lift up the percentage of U-235, the more radioactive, is very difficult. We've used diffusion plants in the past, which are highly energy inefficient. Centrifuges are the most modern ones from the late 70s through to now, and Urenco and Orano and others have got those in place. So now the next technology to do it in a more efficient manner is a real breakthrough, but it hasn't quite been made yet. So Silex are one group that are looking at it. There's a few others around the world looking at how can we get this elevated concentration of U-235 rather than 238, which is a bit like lead, it's just a heavy metal, and do it more efficiently. So it's a real technical breakthrough to make that happen. And look, the company that swings it is going to make a lot of money. So I know that's why you're investing in that.
Well, it's been a long time coming. Now, Greg, we're not here to talk about Silex. We're here to talk about Alligator Energy. So tell me about Alligator Energy. As I say, we last caught up in May 2022. So what's been happening since then?
All right, at that time we had acquired in late 2020 the Samphire Uranium Project just to the south of Whyalla in South Australia, a project which was discovered in the 2000s, flat-lying sediments 80 metres deep, compacted sands, very similar to the Beverley, 4 Mile, Honeymoon deposits which operate in the northeast of South Australia. And it was well advanced by the previous company, Uranium SA, but not developed. So we acquired that. We were continuing our exploration in Arnhem Land. We're looking for those high-grade Ranger-type deposits, which we hope exist in that area. We're still continuing that work. And we now have a new uranium exploration over Big Lake uranium, which are the sediments over the top of the Cooper Basin, the oil and gas basin in northern South Australia, which are the same sediments that host the Beverley, 4 Mile and Honeymoon. So we still are working on all three of those areas in uranium. But in particular, we've advanced the Samphire project in Whyalla. We are going through an approval process for a small retention lease, which is really only a kilometre by kilometre, to do a trial of the in-situ recovery method of uranium mining in the Samphire deposit itself. So we've done all the bench scale testing. We completed that work in 21-22. We've gone through a scoping study, which we put out in 23, which showed with the current resource, enhanced resource we did that year, we've got an economic project, especially at the long-term pricing of 75 as it stands now. And so we started the process in early 23 of approval for a field recovery trial. Now we're in the final stages of that approval, we believe. It is subject to the Department of Energy Mining in South Australia granting a retention lease and then approving our operating plan. But we think in the third quarter this year we'll be running that field recovery trial on the site in near Whyalla. We've engaged widely with the stakeholders there. We've had a lot of public information sessions. We've taken the Whyalla Council personnel out to the site so they understand what we're proposing. And during the trial, we'll bring a lot of interested parties out to the site so they can see exactly what a small in-situ trial operation looks like. Now, many people have either worked or heard of the Beverley uranium mine, the 4 Mile mine, and now Boss Energy's Honeymoon restarting, but they are more distant, and so not many people have seen them. So we know this is an important part of our business now, is to make sure that our stakeholders understand and are familiar with the very low impact that this method of mining can have, the test work we're doing, what we're doing, and in particular the rehabilitation and importantly the rehabilitation of the hypersaline groundwater. Even though it's high salinity, we have to make sure it can be rehabilitated. So that is a very important step for us this year, and that will lead straight into a feasibility study for the project on the basis of the economic and technical parameters from that trial. So yes, we're at a very important stage in the business for that, and we're well funded for that. We raised a good amount of funds last year again to feed into that process.
Now, Greg, this in situ recovery process, this is pretty well-known existing technology. I guess it's very well known in Kazakhstan, where they've had some issues with sourcing and creating sulfuric acid to continue with that. Is that something that you need to address, or did you just buy that down at Bunnings?
Well, not quite at Bunnings, but there is a reasonably ready supply of the acid used for the methodology here, and that's from things like some of the smelters, the Mount Isa smelter and things, where they convert the off gas into acid for reuse. And look, while it always is a difficult message for people to hear, to say what you're putting acid into the ground, what does that do, etc. I just want to make sure people understand we use and circulate the saline groundwater, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a closed loop system. It doesn't contact any other part of the soils, the upper level, anything like that. It's a closed loop system. For every 10,000 litres of hypersaline groundwater, which is not usable for anything, that we circulate, we only add 4 litres of acid. So it's a very small quantum. So it's just lowering the pH slightly of the groundwater. And it's very localised because there are other elements within the groundwaters and in the sands, like old bits of leaf matter or carbon or carbonaceous material or calcrete type material, which absorbs the acid, reacts with it, absorbs it and neutralises it totally. So you're sort of adding small amounts of acid constantly while you're dissolving the uranium and bringing it out. Then at the end of that life, you stop the acid feed in, you keep circulating the groundwaters and allow it to neutralise back to the level it was, and you've got to have monitoring boards all around that area of mining to make sure that's what happens and you don't impact outside that area. So that was an opportunity in talking about acid just to explain the method and how it works. But it is important because as soon as people hear the word acid, they start to worry about what happens in the groundwater. And in Australia, we have a couple of really good things about this. First of all, in general, the waters we're dealing with are hypersaline or have some level of salinity. So they have natural neutralisation. So it's reasonably easy to rehabilitate. The other thing is, as you said, we don't yet have a lot of in situ recovery uranium mines, so the volume of acid being used is quite small.
Right. Good. All right. Well, that's actually really cleared that up, because you do get a bit freaked out when you hear about acid and groundwater, as you say. Now, obviously, Samphire is just one pillar of your company's projects. You've got Alligator River as well. Maybe you could run us through what's happening up in the Alligator Rivers area.
Yeah, look, we've started work on a new package of tenements which we had granted in the Alligator Rivers area in 2020, just as COVID hit. So then we were restricted about access for some years, but that's good. We're now back on the ground. We're engaging with the Indigenous people there, the two main groups that we deal with, and again we did a work program there last year for the first serious work on this new area. And the good thing about this part of the Alligator Rivers that we're now looking at, it's not overlain by that sandstone, that beautiful sandstone that makes up the escarpment in Kakadu National Park to the west, which also overlies large parts of Arnhem Land. That's been eroded away and weathered away where we're working. So we're not having to work underneath a barren sandstone. That makes our exploration cheaper, and that's good. It also means in a new area we've got a large footprint to have a look at. So we've been using both geophysical techniques, some short stab drilling to look at the geochemistry and the geology, and that's what we did in the first year. This year we now have defined some targets that we're going to be coming back and doing some RC, reverse circulation drilling, to really try and hit, are we in the right rocks? And if we're in the right rocks, is there some presence of uranium that we want to have a look at? So we've got a series of targets, and we'll be starting on the ground in July. We're giving ourselves time because there's been a pretty big wet season, which might run a bit longer. So we're giving ourselves time to get on the ground and do a good solid series of work this year with some RC drilling, which will be excellent. So we're really hoping that we can pin down the geology. Sometimes in a brand new area like this, you've got about 3 years worth of geological work before you can really say, right, now we've got some defined targets. We do have some this year, but we still might take another full year of work to be able to say what have we got in the ground.
There certainly has been some rain up that way, hasn't there, recently? We've had it with 29 medals, and even Gold Road has had issues with Gruyere as well with weather events. So it's not been easy for miners with this these sorts of climate change things, which I guess only means that we need to bring uranium and nuclear power in quicker rather than later. So you've also got an interesting project, I guess, in northern Italy, the Pedmont Project, which is nickel, cobalt, copper, critical metals, critical minerals for Europe, and you're looking, I guess, to do something with that.
Yeah, we are. So we really picked this project up in about 2018-19 when uranium was still in the doldrums. So we were looking for energy-related minerals that could relate to the business of, if you like, energy and uranium that we like. Now, we are looking at a variety of things, and I'll talk about this Pedmont one plus another recent investment. So in Pedmont, there are 17 showings of 0.5% nickel or more, and that was a real interest to us and our nickel specialists that we brought out of Canada to have a look at this and said, my God, we haven't seen something like this before, except in parts of Canada. So there hasn't been a lot of work done. They were small, narrow vein mines operated up to World War II, and they just stopped. There's not one drill hole in 20 or 30 kilometres of potential foot here. The problem we have is that we have a focused effort at Samphire. We know that that's what drives our value for our shareholders and our market cap and our share price. And so we've done some limited work at Pedmont. We've identified some potential geophysics plates. We've got drilling permits that are ready to go. We really don't want to put a lot of money into it. We're looking for a partner to help us come in there. So a couple of years ago, we did talk to a range of partners up in Europe. Now we're going to broaden that out, talk to some potential Australian interested nickel partners. So it's a bit more like a counter-cyclical nickel play at the moment. Nickel prices down, cobalt prices not at its best. is there someone who wants to come in at an early stage on this project and have an evaluation of this? The good thing about that is the Italian government now more recently, and I think this was mid last year, have come out and said, we now want to evaluate what critical and strategic minerals we have in Italy that we can help support ourselves, help support the EU. The EU has got incentives to the European Bank to help companies which find resources or in potential resources and bring them forward. And you're even having some large European companies like Volkswagen and others investing straight into mining projects that are mining the required metals. So we think it's something that could be of interest to the right company, and we want to find that company to come into us.
That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Now, if we're looking ahead in 2024, which seems to be going at a remarkable rate, we're already through Easter and we're into April. What are the milestones? What are the catalysts that investors in Alligator Energy should be looking for? What's your plan, I guess, for the rest of the year?
Well, we are at the Samphire project. We're resource drilling now to expand the resource from the one we announced in December. So we focused on lifting the quality of the resource last year. This year we're focusing on expanding the size of the resource. Now we already have, under the scoping study, a 12-year project, £1.2 million a year, very economic. And as we expand this resource, we can either increase the life or maybe increase the production rate, both of which will help economics. So that resource drilling is underway. We're about to have a break for the pastoralists on the ground, so we're going to put out some results in the coming month or so. We're targeting to do a resource update by the end of the year, is the main target. That it will support some of the ongoing studies, in particular as we get into a feasibility study in 25. The second thing is the field recovery trial, as I said. We're anticipating, we put an announcement out this week that said it's a 6 to 8 week review period by the Department of Energy and Mining here that we've been advised to review a decision on this retention lease. And so, subject to them requiring more information, we anticipate that decision coming forward. So that will be announced at the time. We then have to have the operating plan. We're doing the detailed civil design for the 100 by 40 metre impact footprint that we have to work on. And then once we have that operating plan, we'll announce we're on the ground constructing. That's probably the early third quarter. So that's key steps for us. Then we're operating the field recovery trial, which is only 3 to 4 months, and we get virtually instant results within the first month of running the solution and getting the trial. We're getting results really in the third to fourth quarter straight away. That then feeds in the start-up of a feasibility study, which we're starting to do plans around with our project manager, and that would start up towards the end of the year. So that's the line for Samphire going forward this year, continuing the feasibility study into 25. Now, as I mentioned, we've already met with a range of nuclear utilities, as any company our stage would, and there has been some early stage discussions for, let's say, initial offtake agreements potentially, which will be conditional upon approval, conditional upon financing. And so we may be at the stage in early 25 we can put some of those initial contracts in place. Certainly this year, once we've got the field trial running, we're starting in full detail on the preparation for the mining lease application, which would be the approval you need for a full mine in the future. That will take some years, and so we need to start that work now. So that's the game plan for Samphire. Along with that, we have the drilling, RC drilling going to take place at Arnhem Land, and we'll have the first drilling on our Big Lake Uranium project in the Cooper Basin. Cooper Basin is first, starting in May, and then Arnhem Land July.
It's going to be a big year, Greg.
Well, that's why we raised some money last year, because we have to spend it on behalf of shareholders in a very wise way.
So how much did you raise last year, just to fill in the blanks?
We raised about $30 million. We did both targeted placements to funds, who some who have been in this for some time and come in again, others who are new, and also SPP with our retail shareholders.
And now, we might as well, while we're here, touch on your investment in Enviro Copper. That's interesting.
Yeah, look, as I mentioned before, we picked up the nickel cobalt in Pedmont when uranium's in the doldrums. And one of the strategies that we have agreed at a board level is, yes, we've got a good uranium profile. We'll always look at future uranium prospects. Your listeners may know, if they've heard me speak before, that we've been looking, for example, for uranium in North America and different places. But we also want to see what is on our ground. There is potential lithium in condensates in the Cooper Basin. There is a lot of granites in Arnhem Land, and if they've got highly weathered clay profiles, possibly they've got interesting minerals within those weathered clay profiles. We know that on the tenements we've got around Whyalla there's presence of copper, so we've had a separate company look at the potential for copper there. And one of the things that interested us in this sort of range of energy minerals that we might have access to already or other projects was copper oxide through South Australia. There are many, many tonnes. This is the high-level copper at the surface of the earth, of the ground where it's been weathered. It's not sulfide anymore, it's oxide. It's more difficult to extract. And there's a lot of it in South Australia, but it's difficult and not so economic to extract. However, if you have a copper deposit below the surface, it's oxidised, it's fractured, and it's got a groundwater regime in it, it's potentially amenable ISR, in situ recovery, through solution mining, the same as we're doing for uranium, but a very different setting. So this company, Enviro Copper Limited, has spent a lot of time doing a lot of detailed fracture mapping modelling work on a couple of copper projects in Kapunda and Alfred West, and having a look at, is it amenable to this? And they've got permission through the Mines Department after a lot of work to do some trials on the Kapunda projects where there's already a lot of copper in the groundwater from the historical mining there, both underground and open pit. So this is both in a way to clean up the copper out of the groundwaters, but also to see whether it's an economic prospect for deposits like that, and then transfer that to potentially other deposits. Now, our team, through our Chief Operating Officer, Andrea Marsland-Smith, has a lot of experience in operating production ISR systems. The team at ECR have a lot of experience in exploration and development and testing, and so there's a good synergy between us. And we are interested in the ISR mining technique being applied to other minerals because it's a very, very low impact technique. You do not disturb the surface of the ground, it's very easily recoverable, and it's proven in techniques to be able to recover certain minerals out of certain fractured rocks. So it's an investment for us. We've got the right over time if we wish to go up to 51%, but we certainly want to support them through this initial trial. And the benefit of this to both us and ECR is BHP have put funds into their first trial, so they can also gain access to the IP. So it's we think it's a valuable proposition for our shareholders potentially in the future.
Yeah, it looks interesting, doesn't it? Well, good luck with that. Greg, you've been more than generous with your time. Just finally, if you could sum up the reasons why investors should look at Alligator over, say, Deep Yellow or Boss. I know they're probably at different stages, but what's the great attraction for shareholders or investors looking at Alligator? What are the...
Well, I think you just said it, Henry. We're at different stages. So Alligator is at an early development stage of a new ISR project. Now, if you look at the market cap of companies which are either just starting ISR production or nearly starting ISR production, they are much higher than ours. So we're certainly on a path that is going to grow value if we de-risk the project and take it forward into that approval process and then into a potential operation. So that's going to add value. We also have, as you saw, as you've seen, if you see any of our plans and our presentations, we're only looking at about 10% of the known channels in the area. So we've got expansion potential for additional resources, and we know that. We've got mineralised intersections in 40% of the channels, and the others haven't even been drilled yet. So we know there's expansion potential in the resource. We are in an area close to Whyalla where you've got very low infrastructure costs. So we don't have to do a 300-kilometre power line or water line. We've only 25 kilometres. And we don't have to build a camp, we don't have to build an airstrip. We've already got a small workforce out of Whyalla working on our project now. So all of those things mean this project will be a very viable ISR uranium project into the future as we go through this de-risking and approval project in the next 4 or so years. So that's the climb in our value. What's going to drive the climb in our value, we believe. And now we're actually at a very good stage now. We've done the initial scoping work, initial resource. Now we're at a stage of in-situ testing leading to feasibility. So we're going to de-risk the project much further this year.
And I guess that's one of the great things about mining companies, exploration companies. You can kind of see the timeline, you can see the horizon because other people have done it and they get that value uplift as you go along. So, investors can see what the catalysts are going to be, providing they're successful, of course, provided the grades and the size, etc., and the DFS is. But you can kind of see a long time into the future in terms of what will be the uplift events, and how much you can get on those uplifts, which I think is something you don't always see in industrial stocks.
No, I agree with you, and there's plenty of examples in uranium companies, both in the US, in Canada, in Australia, and other parts of the world, of how this uplift occurs as you have successful de-risking of the project. The important thing is successful, the important thing is de-risking, and you've got to have funds to do that, which we have. So I think we're on a good path in the next 2 years.
I guess, we've seen that only this week in terms of Paladin with their first production, their first barrel for many a long year, having brought Lager Heinrich back on stream. There was a big value uplift there just on the back of that. So you can kind of see how it all plays out.
No, that's right. And Paladin really started in earnest on that path about 4 years ago. So that's the sort of time period that you need to get this into production.
You have to be patient, don't you, as a miner?
Well, you have to work hard and be patient. That's correct.
Well, I'm sure, Greg, you do both. And thank you so much for sparing us the time today and running us through the Alligator story. It's a good story. Uranium is a good story as well. So we're really grateful for your time and educating our listeners on this. So thanks once again.
No, thank you very much, Henry. It's a pleasure.